would try to, over the next 20 or 25 minutes, to give you, or tell you the story on how the process of creating European diplomacy, European foreign ministry has actually got off the ground, the successes we have had, the difficulties which we have encountered. The project to create a European foreign service, we don't call that the European Foreign Service for political reasons, because member states don't like that word, so we call it European External Action Service, but in reality it is the same. The project to create this was part of the last treaty change which the European Union implemented, the so-called Lisbon Treaty. And the Lisbon Treaty entered into force on the 1st of December 2009. I would say almost exactly at the same moment where the economic crisis, which we had experienced following the subprime crisis in the United States, started in 2000 and 2008, but it was the time when this crisis turned into what I would call a Euro crisis, a crisis which in fact put into question the survival of the European monetary system. So this whole process of creating an external action service has taken place at the same time as Europe, to some extent, has been fighting for the survival of its currency, the euro. And I think the two processes have been interlinked. To some extent, it has made the process of creating an external service more difficult. In other aspects, it has maybe increased the need for having a common European foreign service. But before getting into the link, I would maybe try to explain some of the other difficulties which we faced in creating this external service. One thing was, surprisingly, lack of preparation. As I said, the Lisbon Treaty entered into force in December 2009. The ratification process had lasted almost for 8 or 9 years. Everybody knew that one day there would be a treaty and with it a foreign service, but somehow we didn't manage to get the preparation done. One reason was political. The Lisbon Treaty and its which actually originated in the project for a European constitution, was rejected in referenda in Holland and in France. Later, the transformed treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, was rejected in Ireland. So it was politically problematic to do preparation at a time when you didn't know whether the treaty would ever come into force. So we basically started from scratch in 2009. So one problem, lack of preparation. Another problem was that creating this European foreign service was actually a voyage in uncharted water. I worked at the project of creating the External Action Service at the time. I was told by all my friends, well, that's a simple project. You just take an organigram for one of the bigger countries' foreign service, and you do a bit jiggling here, juggling there, and you have the European Foreign Service or the European External Service. Well, it wasn't that simple as that. First of all, the European Union has a very complicated institutional setup, which I could use the whole day to try to explain. I will refrain from that. But the fact of having such a complicated institutional framework, the fact that foreign policy inside the European Union still remains what we call an intergovernmental cooperation, where each member state can say no to a particular course of action, where you cannot vote by qualified majority voting, which you can in most others, was a complicating factor. Second thing that distinguished the European External Service from a normal foreign ministry in a country is that, to some extent, the European Foreign Service has many more instruments at its disposal that you would normally have in a national foreign ministry. European External Action Service was to deal with classical foreign policy, as is also done in national ministries, but it had at its disposal some instruments which you'd normally never find in a national foreign service. First of all, they had a huge development aid funds available to the tune of $12 billion per year. In fact, the European Union is the world's greatest single donor of development aid. And to managing that and to use that instrument in setting up a foreign policy, I think was a special task. On the other extreme, the European Action Service also has available crisis management instruments, ranging from instruments where you can use military force to instruments which are more soft diplomacy, as we have heard, which can consist of conducting peace missions, conducting police missions abroad. Again, that you will basically never find in a national foreign ministry. You might have it in other ministries like the Ministry of Defense, but inside the foreign ministry you do not have it. Third difficulty in this endeavor of setting up a foreign service was to create the foreign services foreign service, embassies outside the European Union. This is a process which in member states have taken centuries. We were supposed to do that in 1 year's time. The European External Action Service has today 130 or almost 140 embassies around the world, which make it, even in European terms, probably the foreign service which has the broadest range of countries covered. Because all of these countries are outside Europe. Inside Europe, by definition, is not external policy, it's internal policy. We have them in national capitals, we have them in international organizations. And finally, all of this was going to be done with some scarce resources. The European External Action Service was to be created by moving together people which until then had served inside the Commission. Commission had, for instance, also had offices in a number of third countries, but with people strictly dealing with development aid and development programs or foreign trade. Now, they were moving into the service. We had one of the branch of the legislative authority in the Union, the Council, which also had people dealing with foreign service. They were moved into the same service. And finally, the service was to be manned with a third of its personnel coming from the member states. So 3 different sources of staff, 3 different cultures, which you had to try to unite in one culture. But despite the fact that we sort of are grabbing people from everywhere, the Foreign Service, giving its task, was to become a very small organization. All in all, the External Action Service today has a staff of around 1,500 people. If you compare it to national foreign services, it is a foreign service which is placed somewhere in between the Danish foreign service and the Dutch foreign service. It's smaller than the Dutch foreign service. And compared, for instance, to the foreign service in the big member states, France or Germany or the UK, there you can count the numbers of staff in thousands. Or to give you another point of comparison, the United States Embassy to China has 2,200 persons placed in Beijing. So one embassy is much more than the whole External Action Service taken together. When all of these elements are taken together, I'm actually quite proud of what we have achieved until now in creating the service, which got off the ground 1 year after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, and which has been developing its activities over these past 4 years. I think the creation of an External Action Service has brought more continuity into European external action, including external action on foreign and security. Until this service was created, our foreign service was basically run by the rotating presidency. And that meant that those who were in charge of the foreign service changed every 6 months. Some big countries probably incapable of running such a global foreign service, but where some of the smaller member states, in particular some of the new member states, had great difficulties, had no tradition, for instance, of having diplomatic relations in certain parts of the world. I know it by myself when Denmark became a member of the European Union back in 1973. Latin America was basically a blank part of the map. We had no relations, no feeling about what happened in Latin America. So by creating a foreign policy, we have created much greater continuity in what we do in our external relations. I think that creating the external branch of the foreign policy, we have also managed to create a core of EU diplomats in third countries, which will increasingly play a much bigger role than in the past, where we had the rotating presidency being the one responsible in a third country for EU's external policy. It will not be tomorrow that the European Foreign Service will take over member states' role in Beijing or be able to compete with the American embassy with the 2,200 persons. But even in Beijing, or in Washington for that matter, the European External Action Service plays an important role in combining the forces of the national diplomatic representations in the capital. They organize regular meetings, and they are sort of a point of contact for all the EU's embassies in Washington or in Beijing. And we understand now by the latest leaks that also the American Secret Service has increased its interest in our external service, since the EU embassy in Washington seems to have been one of the targets of the spying which has taken place over the past years. What better proof can you have of the fact that European diplomacy is starting to work? I think we will see in the coming years that the EU ambassadors, in particular, I would say in the upcoming emerging developing countries, in South Africa, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Indonesia, in India, will gradually turn into becoming the main interlocutor for local authorities. First of all, because they are one, and it's more easy to deal with one than to deal with 27. But also because the External Action Service has at its disposal a number of instruments which member states no longer have. For instance, trade policy in the EU is a policy which is completely centralized with the European Union. So national embassies cannot talk trade policy with third countries, but the EU delegation and EU as a unity can talk trade relations with third countries. We have, I think, over the past 4 years, been able to reinforce our soft and hard security presence abroad. In particular, our soft power presence. And we have been able to use the advantage which the European Union has compared to many other actors at the international scene, including the member states, that we are able to combine a number of instruments when we are doing a foreign policy action. Let me take one example. The European Union is running a maritime operation in the Indian Ocean to fight piracy, which is a big scourge in that part of the world, and is, by the way, something which is spreading to other parts of the world. So we have a naval presence in the Indian Ocean, together with a number of other powers. The United States is present, China is present, India is present to protect the commercial fleet from pirates. NATO also has an operation in the Indian Ocean, but I would say in terms of military muscles, curiously enough, probably the EU mission is the most muscular in the sense that we can, through that naval mission, also operate on the ground, so we can follow the pilots, not just on the open sea, but also when they go ashore at the Somalian coast. This operation, the purely military part of the operation, is then combined with a number of other operations. We are training the Somalian security forces to be able to them, hopefully one day, to take over security operations more efficiently inside Somalia. We are building up, through technical assistance, a Coast Guard in Somalia. We are combining all of that with our development aid programs, trying to promote economic development in Somalia and surrounding countries. So this is a very good example of how we are able inside the European Union to combine various instruments in promoting an effective action. So far, so good. Present period, the period which we have been through, has also revealed a number of weaknesses in our external action. I talked about institutional difficulties and institutional infighting. The basic purpose of setting up an external action service was to combine all the various instruments which we have at our disposal at the external field. Problem is that some of these instruments were run, or is still run, by the Commission. So there has been, in my opinion, too much infighting between the Commission and the new External Action Service in finding this combined role. We had a Libyan crisis which required military intervention. At the end, it was NATO that took over that task. Not all member states participated. When the action was voted in the United States, in the United Nations, a number of member states voted for. One, in particular one prominent member state, Germany, abstained. So this was an area where we did not, at least totally, show external cohesion. But I think if we dig a bit deeper, we also saw that the action of the European Union probably was more important than many people realized. It was in particular important in the area of humanitarian assistance in many of its aspects, including evacuations of foreigners in Libya. When the crisis broke out in Libya, there were probably 1,500,000 foreigners in Libya. A few EU nationals we had to try to get out, but the huge majority of the foreigners were foreign labor from Bangladesh, from India, from Algeria, from Egypt, and the EU was actually quite instrumental in assuring this evacuation of these foreigners that had been caught in between the Libyan army and the rebels. And we had known in the past external action which have divided the European Union member states, including the most prominent one probably being Iraq, where the European Union sort of split down in the middle, which led to a complete deadlock in our policy vis-à-vis Iraq. This time around, even though we were divided, we still continued to pursue a common policy in the areas where we could operate. So much for some elements in the setting up of this service. Well, how did the financial crisis affect this process? Well, it affected in the negative sense, in limiting the resources that member states were willing to provide for building the service. The External Action Service has, like any other public body in the EU and member state, suffered from budgetary authority. We probably also, in a more general sense, has lost influence in world affairs because of the euro crisis. First of all, the euro crisis meant that we have become probably too much inward-looking in many ways. And secondly, vis-à-vis the outside world, there has been a certain annoyance with, I would say, the performance of the European Union. Every time we went to an international summit, the main message was, why do you, Europe, not get your act together and solve the euro crisis, which is also having influence in third countries. So the euro crisis has probably had a negative influence in the setting up of the action, which is a problem. Of course, it's a problem for the EU in the sense that we are exerting less influence on world affairs than we could have done without the euro crisis. But very immodestly, I also think it's a problem for the world, in the sense that we have seen in the past that the European Union very often has been the one international actor which has taken initiatives in trying to overcome international problems in one way or the other. One very prominent example is the international climate agenda. It has been the EU which basically has been the body that has been pushing the international climate agenda abroad. We can say the same thing about opening up of international market. The free trade agenda has also been one basically pushed internationally by the European Union, with the others following more or less willingness. When we're looking at areas as international financial regulation, it has also been the European Union which has been pushing for international rules and standards on financial regulations. So the absence of the European Union is actually felt, I think, in what we could call international governance in a broad sense. Because of course, there are many other important actors, the United States, China, India, and others. But if you look at those big actors, they are very good in saying what they like and what they don't like, where we can move and where we cannot move. But there are very few who are actually taking initiative in an international sense. So in that sense, I think we have been missing Europe under the present crisis. Of course, that this is something which will overcome, and one day we will return to to our role. Basically, and that will be my last comment, then if you have questions, you are willing, I'm quite willing to try to answer them, is that looking forward, I am quite optimistic on the future of a European diplomacy and a European foreign policy and a European foreign service. Somebody said at the international level, there is a difference between the member states. There are those who have understood that they are small and in its international scale, and there are those that still have not understood it. I think all member states, including the biggest ones, are small at an international scale. So unless we get our acts together and start working as a unit, we will lose influence at the international scale. I also think we will be forced by other international players to be more active, including in the security and military field. I think the days are gone where the United States was willing to intervene in Kosovo, Bosnia. They were willing to intervene in Libya, but I'm not sure that that would happen if the operation was repeated tomorrow. So I think we will be forced to take on our own responsibility to a greater extent, in particular in our neighborhood. And neighborhood for Europe also is Africa. Africa is our neighborhood. There was a time when people would say, forget about a common European policy in Africa, because Africa was a continent which was colonized by various different member states, so Africa is sort of divided between the old colonial powers. If you look at Africa today, I think we have all similar problems in Africa. We have a problem of the danger of failed states, which could become a nest of terrorism tomorrow. Somalia is a case in point. Mali is another case in point. So this is typically a problem in Africa, which is a common problem, and is not just limited to France or the UK or Germany. We have a problem of illegal immigration, again, where there are, with the internal Europe without frontier, is not a filière going only to France or going to Belgium or going to Denmark. We are all in the same boat. And if you want to combat illegal immigration to Europe from Africa, we need to ensure development in Africa. And let's face it, we have all today sort of a competition with China in Africa. China is becoming an important development operator in Africa, not based on the same philosophy as we have for promoting development aid, and with maybe a hidden agenda which is access to raw materials in Africa. We all are faced with that problem and need to come up with a common solution. And as I see member states' positions developing, I think that today we are, even though there are differences, much closer to having a common approach and a common vision on what we should do. I think I'll stop here.
Let's express our gratitude.